The light rays of the new religious dawn that the Prophet Muhammad had brought with him to the modest agricultural town of Medina had carried over the decades and now emitted from the source of the city's enlightened scholarly circles, whom seekers of knowledge from all across the Muslim world travelled to learn under. What was once a place of refuge for a number of persecuted believers and their holy leader was now a city radiating with traditions attributed to him. Within the Medina, a young blue-eyed, blonde-haired boy threw pebbles across the road. Yesterday, he had been rebuked by his father for being far too distracted with his pet pigeons to ever amount to anything. And today, his mother had crushed his dreams by declaring, "An Arab with strange looks such as yours will never make it as a singer as you wish." Instead, she took him to sit in the company of scholarly circles who taught on ethics, history, and law. Hesitant to engage at first, he soon developed an admiration for the wise intellectuals he studied under, and eventually became determined to absorb as much knowledge as he could. Now, at the annoyance of his teachers, he would stand for hours outside their doors in the scorching heat, only to ask a question that could have waited until the next day. Unbeknown to them, the same boy would, according to many later scholars, fulfill an apparent prophecy. Very soon, people will beat the flanks of camels in search of knowledge, and they shall find no better expert than the knowledgeable scholar of Medina. Indeed, the boy would grow up to become the central eponymous figure of the Maliki school of law, and one of the earliest compilers of Islamic laws and traditions as we know it. Imam Malik ibn Anas, the Jurist of Medina. A big thank you to our patrons and YouTube members Mahmoud Mahajna, Neon Tiger, Ilyas Tauti, Yusuf, and Yaqub Ogunsina. Thank you for your support. Malik ibn Anas was born in the city of Madinatul Munawwara in the year 711 CE during the reign of the Umayyads. He would live in the city for his whole life, fearing that he might die outside the area where the Prophet Muhammad had once lived. Being of Yemeni origin, it is said that Malik's great-grandfather was either a direct companion of the Prophet Muhammad or was a student under the companions. As a pious scholar of religion, Malik had a deep love for Medina and viewed it, apart from being just his home, as a place of tradition and history. His family was also one that was active within religion, and Malik's elder brother, An-Nadr, was a famous student whom people identified Malik with, although soon this reversed. One story records how the young Malik would bribe scholars' servants to inform students in the queue with inquiries that the scholar was busy today. This way, Malik kept scholars for himself for long hours of discussion, memorizing all that was mentioned by the teacher, and he would keep track of this by tying a knot on a string. For every new tradition he learned, a new knot was tied. Imam Malik was eventually known across the world for his knowledge of fiqh and his memorization of traditions. And it is said that he would even make the famous Abu Hanifa sweat in a debate. Yet, despite his vast knowledge, intellectual modesty was not lost on Malik. He did not hesitate in admitting that his knowledge was limited, even to people who would travel long distances to receive fatwa or verdicts from him. It is reported that one man travelled all the way from Morocco to Medina for a fatwa to a case that his people had entrusted him with. When Malik had no answer for the man and the community's question, the man stated, "I have left behind people who say that there is no one on the face of the earth more knowledgeable than you." Finally, Malik replied, "I have an answer," he said. "Go back and tell them that I don't think that that's true." Malik and his brother were once asked a fiqh question in their Islamic law class. After Malik's older brother answered correctly, and Malik didn't know how to respond, he was rebuked for being far too distracted by the birds to learn anything useful. It was at this point that Malik decided to dedicate himself more seriously to his studies. Malik's teaching style of sacred knowledge was characterized by solemnity and precision, and he wouldn't teach unless he was sitting down and in a state of ritual purity. Unlike the teaching style of Abu Hanifa, Malik despised debate and argumentation and avoided engaging in it himself, and also encouraged his students to follow suit. For Malik, debate was rarely practiced as a proper art of learning and refinement of speech. To him, it was often used simply as a tool for many to inflate their ego. Also, unlike the Iraqi school, he avoided speculative jurisprudence, viewing hypothetical legal questions as a distraction from practical matters. Eventually, Malik's reputation and approval amongst his peers grew to the point where caliphs, such as the famous Harun al-Rashid, patronized his research and even aimed to codify his rulings and jurisprudence across the empire. Yet, Malik always declined, stating that community law was something that should be left to local scholars and jurists who understood the context of the provinces within which they lived and researched. Still, the patronage was a welcome change for the ascetic jurist who, at one point, would have to sell the stones of his roof for a simple income. The notion of jurisprudence and attachment to geography is somewhat of a recurring theme within Imam Malik's legal methodology. Generally, Malik would search for answers to legal questions in the Quran first and foremost, and then in the Sunnah, or the living tradition. Interestingly, he also considered the practice and consensus of the scholars of Medina as a legal source as well as individual traditions that trace back to the Prophet. Only after all of this would he rely on various forms of independent judgment. Of course, this is also why Imam Malik would sometimes give verdicts in opposition to certain individual traditions. Perhaps if the isolated narration was in contradiction to the widespread consensus or practice of the scholars of Medina. Much like Abu Hanifa, Malik emphasized on the greater reliability of mass-transmitted or mutawatir practices. Unlike Abu Hanifa, however, local tradition and custom was notably paramount for Imam Malik. For him, since Medina was the home and political center of the Prophet for at least a decade, there was more of a connection to the living tradition of the religion that had been passed down generation to generation. Thus, in Medina, there existed the highest probability of accessing historical kernels about the Prophet's legal practice. It was upon these traditions that Imam Malik would compile his magnum opus and one of the first books of Islamic jurisprudence and traditions in history, the Muwatta, or the Well-Trodden Path. Indeed, the Muwatta is one of the earliest compilations that comprehensively lists and categorizes early traditions associated with the companions and the Prophet, as well as the judgments of Malik himself and the rulings of some of his scholarly peers. It is said that Malik had access to data consisting of tens of thousands of narrations associated with the legal teachings of Islam and the life of the Prophet Muhammad. These traditions, however, were left unsystemized, partly due to a fear amongst the earliest Muslims that the traditions may be mixed up for the Quran. Nevertheless, of these traditions, Imam Malik recorded only a few thousand within the Muwatta, which was supposed to have been approved by the contemporaneous scholars of his time. The well-trodden path of Imam Malik and his students' revised version of the text would be instrumental in the spread of the Maliki school of thought across the Islamic world, especially in the western lands of Andalus, Morocco, and North Africa, where Malik's school remains the most popular to this day. It would also cement Imam Malik's position as a prolific hadith transmitter and scholar, as well as an expert legal philosopher revered even in the religious chaos of the modern age. The essential genius of Imam Malik can be found in his attempt to balance between the authenticated records of traditions which he preserved with widespread practices derived from the Quran or the living tradition. However, in some cases, Malik did consider it valid to conjoin the traditions or non-Quranic prophetic practices with Quranic commands, a trend that would be followed by later schools, contrary to the method of the Ahlul Rai or the Hanafis. For this reason, later historians debated on whether to categorize Malik as a champion of the Hadith tradition or a champion of the Ahlul Rai or the people of reasoning. What is agreed upon, however, is that Imam Malik is traditionally recognized as a scholar who could weigh up a tradition with the common jurisprudential practice and identify, in a detective-like manner, which tradition is more authentic and better substantiated. It may be the case that Imam Malik implemented a type of proto-biographical criticism, as he was known to judge and authenticate traditions according to the reliability of the source from which the information was coming. This involved attempting to analyze an individual's general theological knowledge, their memory, and even their tendency, or lack thereof, to lie or transmit biased information. Exactly when the field of biographical criticism, which would act as a vital tool for later historiographers, was formalized in Islamic history is a matter of debate. Some within history, however, do make a strong case for Imam Malik as the father of the method, let alone one of the best practitioners of it. Imam Malik's story serves to remind us of something more than mere intellectual legacy. As a boy, his ambitions were set elsewhere, yet due to the willingness to challenge himself in new areas, he became one of the most influential figures in Islamic history. His relentless critical eye and skills of deduction contributed early to the unique study of traditions within the Islamic sciences, perhaps even influencing early methods of Islamic historiography. Right until the end, Malik himself continued to be humble within the face of fame. He remained comfortable with ambiguity and differences of opinion, and the possibility of contrary opinions being correct, a trait certainly lost within the grand debates of our age. It was for this reason he refused the temptations of political offices, not wanting to burden diverse populations with his idiosyncratic judgments and legal interpretations. "O Amir al-Mu'mineen," he would say, "the differences amongst people of knowledge are a mercy from Allah to the community. Each follows what he considers to be sound, and each is rightly guided, and each desires the pleasure of their Lord." A big thank you to our patrons and YouTube members Mahmoud Mahajna, Neon Tiger, Ilyas Tauti, Yusuf, and Yakub Ogunsina. Thank you for your support.